So I hope that was a nice surprise 2 weeks ago. You got to watch me for 7 hours straight. Sorry for that. As I was thinking more about some of the context needed to use some of the skills we're learning today about dichotomous keys and field ID, it was like this never-ending contextual onion. It was like, I need to talk about this, I need to talk about this too. So it turned into 7 hours of presentations. Now, I hope that that's valuable, especially for those that are focusing on plant projects, just to have that in your background. But fortunately, you don't need to have memorized all of it today. There will be lots of references for you in your books and other resources for reference. But I did want to devote some time to open up the room to questions from the lecture material. So as you were working through, there was a big picture, major groups of plants lecture that looked at how plants related to each other and some of the significant features that delineate them. Lecture 2 was on vegetative features, Lecture 3 was on reproductive features, and Lecture 4 was more resources and other tools. So as you went through those, I hope we all did, did you come across material that you wanted further explanation of? I'll be happy to bring any of those slides and talk about that further. Next 15, 20 minutes. Yeah.
I just have one quick question. You know, when you were describing botany in a day, you were describing the resources, so that was part 4.
Yeah.
You mentioned APG. So how can we, like year-wise, publication year-wise, know that the material that we're kind of getting from that point forward is following like all the new names, all the new nomenclature?
So APG stands for the Angiosperm Phylogeny Group. That's a consortium of researchers across the world that are working on understanding how plants are related to each other and using evolutionary context and genetics. And the first big revision of the major groups came out probably, I don't know, 2001 or 2, okay. And that's APG 1. APG 2 was the consensus from about 2006 to, I don't know, 2010-ish. And now we're on APG 3 or 4. That was probably 2012, 2014. But honestly, anything that's probably post 2003, 4, 5 is going to be pretty close. The revisions since APG 2 have been more minor. And a lot of that reorganization was done more at the family level. And in terms of what genera constitute those families, or what do we call those families in some cases. More importantly, for a southeastern context, if you want an official understanding of what the latest name is, you more or less rely on Weekly, Flora of the Southeast United States, okay. And its online and app counterpart, FloraQuest. The caveat there is Weekly is a splitter. He loves to play with this. Any distinction, we're going to make a new species. And also, some of his calls on, now granted he's superior in every way to me, but some of his calls on some of the names are not fully the consensus at this point. One example would be in the dogwood family. He split off Cornus, so Cornus florida, our flowering dogwood, the state tree, is now called Benthamidia florida. And Dr. Jenny Xiang, who's a professor at NC State and is literally the world's expert on that family, doesn't call it that. Now, so that may change with time, but you know, if especially if you're being professional and you're writing things up and sharing it, it might be a good default just to go with what Weekly is calling it, so we're all clear in a southeastern context. So look on FloraQuest, and the synonyms should be listed. So if they've made any name changes, it'll be listed underneath the name. Okay. But really, for family stuff, yeah, APG 2 and on is going to get you pretty close.
Thank you. Yeah. That really was helpful.
Yeah. Welcome. Other questions? So I can pick anyone in the room and ask them about fruit types. How's your schizocarp today?
Stand-up routine.
What about anything physiologically? Just weird stuff that didn't make sense or didn't understand. The photosynthesis, was that like mind blowing?
I just
Yeah.
have a general question.
Yeah.
About, so like level of detail that someone like you might go around when you're identifying plants. Are you looking at like the sort of hair structure on the leaves, like the stomata, like you're looking at all of that and
Yeah,
you
so
have that up here.
I have no friends. So an example would be like the hickories.
Yeah.
Looking at the hairs and underside of the leaves is important for that. I mean, in the lecture I mentioned 2 species, but I was checking this morning on what I was calling glabra, and I was like, and then there's even like, we'll look at an ash if you're on this side today, and you have to look at how the bud is embedded in the leaf scar, or look at does the teeth on the leaflets go halfway up or all the way up, sort of thing. So yeah, if you want to get accurate to species,
You're looking at all of that.
yeah. Now, having said that, if you've got any sort of key or anything with you, if you've got FloraQuest, you've got this guide, they're going to have a lot of definitions in that. And I don't key anything out in the office without having this nearby. Because there's so many terms to come across, and why memorize them all when you can have some sort of reference, right? So so having some sort of a reference guide to the terms that you may come across in a key, or know how to use the terms that are embedded in this key, because you notice much of the front of the book has a lot of the stuff I talked about, so that's in there. So that should largely be self-contained within any of the keys you're using, hopefully. Now, something like Weekly or FloraQuest, getting down to those species or subspecies, there's a lot of terms in there that may not be in Weekly's guide entirely. So yeah, having this supplementary reference is helpful. Yes.
So on this, with this book, this is just native trees. Is there anything for like, a dichotomous key for invasives?
Not specifically for just invasives. This does have some invasives at the back.
Okay.
And it just has more of a description of them, if I recall. So that can be helpful somewhat in the field. And then in the back, spend some time looking at the invasives, and I have a QR code and a short URL on that form.
Okay.
Or you can just search for the NC Invasive Plant Council website, and those QR codes go straight to the fact sheets for that species and has more detailed descriptions. Weekly, so FloraQuest will contain invasives.
Okay.
Because it's not just, it contains anything that can grow here. And it will indicate if it's invasive, naturalized, or actually native.
Okay, wonderful.
And in fact, and if I may expand on that point briefly, the other thing to ask yourself is, how do I know if it's truly native or not? And can I try not to overthink my procedures here? So in Weekly and in FloraQuest, no one look at my disorganized drive. There are maps. I don't know if I covered this in the lecture or not. So I'll do a quick click here. And my actual presentation date has been quite short, so we've got plenty of time. Let's take a minute. But the fun part with a 1,076 page PDF is that. Okay, so if you look on up here, this is a distribution map of the from Weekly. Sorry, actually. And there are squares and triangles. And the squares or triangles are filled to different extents to indicate how common they are. Squares represent native, triangles represent exotic. So in the case of this Castanea here, looking in the Piedmont, it occurs commonly in the Piedmont. It's rare in the coastal plain and common in the mountains, but it's native. Versus, say, Castanea pumila, which is an exotic chestnut, you'll see it doesn't occur at all in the coastal plain. It occurs rarely in the Piedmont, rarely in the mountains, and because it's a triangle, it's exotic. And there could be additional indicators, like an asterisk, I think, indicates it's endemic. So meaning it's native and only occurs in this one location. So well, in one physiographic province. So say it just occurred in the mountains, it would be probably an empty square with an asterisk beside it. And there can be other kind of indicators. No, sorry, asterisk is a WAIF. Endemic is indicated by EN. WAIF means it's been reported once by someone authoritative, but we can't confirm otherwise since then. It's like maybe a random escapee from one house, but it's not really established. Anyway, so if I would ask, oh yeah, sorry, here's endemic. That means it's endemic. I don't see any, oh, here's a WAIF. So there's been reports, supposedly, of this thing occurring in southern Ohio, right? So if you're asking yourself, is it native here, that's probably be the reference for this. Because Alan was a community ecologist trained in that too, and so he has a good understanding of how things have changed with time here. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
What is the shading on the maps?
So in this case, it's trying to delineate different physiographic provinces, meaning the lightest color is the coastal plain, the light gray is the Piedmont, and the dark gray is the mountains, and the Appalachian Mountains in this case. So all the southeast can be divided into one of those three regions, more or less. And so that's just to delineate those three regions. And the Piedmont, it means the foothills of the Appalachians. Coastal plain is an area that used to be underwater and is flatter, sandier soils typically. Good question. And then there are some other provinces like this is called the what is that? The southern upland, southern highlands or something. So there's a kind of an uplift thingy happening here on that side of Kentucky and Tennessee. And this is the Ozarks, which extend into southeastern Oklahoma, Missouri, and Arkansas. And we won't talk about Texas because nothing good comes from there. Present company excluded. Other questions? Yes.
On the Facebook group for the North Carolina Native Plant Society, I see a lot of discussion about where's the ultimate source for figuring out if things are invasive, and they mentioned BONAP a lot. BONAP. Have you heard of that?
No. Elaborate.
It's kind of like a weeklies, but it's a database of various plant species, and it'll tell you the native ranges.
Yeah,
Okay.
county by county.
BONAP.
BONAP.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Okay, that's good to know. I'll look that
But
up.
they argue a lot about which is there's often conflicting information, unfortunately.
Yeah, and like for example, the NCIPC website is not hypersensitive, but is takes a broad definition of invasive too. Like I don't know if you saw Paulownia starting to bloom here. That is kind of more of a weed here. Like you don't see it escaping and disturbing ecosystems, but in other parts of the country it might be truly invasive. But so there's a little bit of gray zone there. Where it is, or I mean even chickweed is listed as invasive on the IPC website, and it's like and I mean yeah. So but yeah, I'll look at that. That's interesting. See how that is an indicator too. Who else? What else? Yes.
This is like not a well-formed or well-thought-out.
Those are my favorite.
But I've really been struggling, especially like with the videos that you had coming from a very Western scientific sort of tradition,
Yeah.
how to marry that or complement it with an indigenous way of knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Like Rapid Timber and sometimes the sort of tree identification thing, I almost think that like it doesn't work for me. Like I like to just sort of really sit with a plant and get to know it like a friend, and like I'll be able to recognize it if I spend enough time with it sort of in the wild after that. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I was just sort of wondering if you could kind of riff on how biological scientists sort of marry their ways of knowing with indigenous ways of knowing.
Yeah. So we're looking at two different ways of identification here. Holistic versus a more systemic look approach, right? And Holistic identification is that you have exposed yourself enough to it, and you have some reference that authoritates that this is what this is called. It's a pig nut hickory, not a giraffe or something, right? And you can recognize some holistic features, and you know the ecosystem well enough that you can start picking up on it quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. But if you're approached with a brand new organism, I don't know where to begin on this, that is where this more systematic approach is going to be helpful. And now, in terms of where and how systematists and taxonomists define species, the kind of Platonic ideal that may never be achievable is understanding how this population is on its own evolutionary path from some other population, and maybe speciating at some point or whatever. So that, I think, has real grounded. That's a real idea, and we use other methods to try to get to that. So that doesn't. I hope it doesn't. That shouldn't discount indigenous ways of knowing. And then kind of a sidebar here. There's a growing trend to, when you name a new species, to try to integrate some of that. I can't think of a plant example off the top of my head, but it's kind of silly. But a lot of dinosaurs now that have been discovered in like southwestern China always incorporate Chinese names, right? Just to give you some recognition there. And yeah, so I think that if you can. That's what I would suggest. So there's nothing wrong at all with just your method.
And just to clarify, so because sort of the taxonomy has been so radically upended in botany and other fields, that, we don't, everything that you know about dinosaurs from 1900 is completely false, for example. You were saying earlier, it's basically since 2001 and on when they started doing the genetic kind of mapping is when we should sort of trust things. Like I shouldn't look at a 1960s book and believe that the taxonomy in that is correct, right?
Well, no, I wouldn't go that far.
Okay.
So what I didn't want to, what I've overemphasized perhaps unintentionally, is that when we started looking at plants genetically and looking at the evolution relationships, it was amazing how close we got just using morphology. So much was correct, astoundingly so. In terms of big picture relationships, families, similarities, a lot of those morphological characters do represent something real evolutionarily, right?
Botanists are better scientists than all the other disciplines.
Well, that's obvious. I mean, you remember botanists, physicists? No. Chemists are back here. Now, because we have in our system ways of naming things in a procedural manner and in a proper manner, and giving proper authority, and who discovered it first and who's called the species first. There's been name changes, but that is just trying to be a more accurate representation, right? So there has been there's a lot of stability, really, and the reorganizations have been like, oh well, didn't expect that, and so instead of making this one big family, we're going to split this family apart. Or this one, these genera from this family are more basal than we thought, the more primitive, so we're going to group them over here with this family. And then in other cases, it just made sense, like to obliterate the idea of rank really above the order level, because those evolution relationships became so complex and somewhat arbitrary in what you called an order and groups of families. So the other trend that may be like an ideal at some point would be naming things after their spot on the phylogenetic tree instead of a kind of arbitrary rank.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Sorry, can I add a little bit to that?
No, absolutely.
So I do things probably a little bit more like what you're talking about. And so when I teach our Master Gardener class in Durham, we talk a lot about vibe. And what I mean by that is that you will have this whole series of plants that you get to know them and you get to know what they feel like and you get to know kind of how they look and just a sense about them. And you can typically get pretty close that way. And so when I go out, I might be able to name 10 things and I might not be able to get you down to species, but I got you close enough that then it complements really, really well with sort of the more systematic approach, right, where you're going to go through and do a key. Because I don't need you to start at tree if you could start at oak, right?
Sure.
And so that's part of what you'll develop. And it's, I think, a way of kind of marrying these two ways of like knowing what it is and how it works. And I think to also, cover your ears, Matt, really think about whether you need to get down to species for the exact thing you're doing.
Oh yeah.
Because there might be times when you're like having a pleasant walk through the woods and like you don't actually need to get out the key. You can just be like, oak, I'm happy to see you. You know what I mean? And kind of keep going about your life. And there are other times when you really want to do that, and that's a very useful exercise. So think about your context too for kind of how you want to do that. But you'll start, and you have this, I mean, you use your key books, but you have a sense when you look at a plant from kind of overall structure and feel.
Like when we go out today, I won't be using a key at all. I mean, so
and
that's
and
very
part
good
of that is that it's you're developing kind of a feel of what that looks like, and because especially, and we'll see this on a lot of the plants that you guys have tagged out, biology is weird, right? And things don't look the way that the key described, and they don't, like, the tree doesn't know what its reference pictures were, so you kind of have to be able to accommodate all of that as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the big goals if you're doing this more commonly, and what I hope I alluded to clearly in the resources chapter is like once you start to get to know families, then that's going to be a great way to just like that's some rosaceous thing. I mean, or like with grasses, like God, that's a grass. I'll stop there. Or especially sedges too. So that's perfectly valid. Yeah. And in some way, actually, I had an interesting I had an internship at a arboretum, and as I was learning some of these plants I wasn't familiar with, I would ask, like, okay, help me with the family here. I was like obsessed, like, where does this belong in the category? And but that's a personal problem. And the other intern was like, well, why do you need to know? I'm like, well, the evolution. And really for a lot of our reasons, maybe it's more important to understand more its place ecologically, like what's it doing in the ecosystem is maybe a more important question than exactly, is because there's been so much, so many different taxa do similar things in different systems, and so that's the bigger question. Yeah, and then
To that point, like, isn't there still value in not just relying on the DNA? Like, isn't there still like a debate between whether we should like just keep going with the DNA stuff, even though it's kind of like disproved certain things that we thought were related? We're like, oh, it's actually like evolutionarily not the case that we thought those things were in the same. Does that question make any sense at all? Like,
well, I mean, so right, like DNA itself is not the ultimate answer because we're still using, sort of yes and no, like so it's still a, I don't think we're to the point yet where we're doing full genome sequencing of every species ever, right? So we're using just different genes, a set of genes that we've chosen because of how we think those genes evolve at a certain rate and how variable they are, etc. So there's still going to be some gray zones there, and you can also make a case like for example, I think Weekly recently put Mahonia, which is in the it's that kind of holly-looking, somewhat invasive species with really pointy leaves, big berries. And it's in the same family as barberry, and always has been. It's very clearly in the related to barberry, but he renamed it as a species of Berberis or barberry. And Mark Wethington, who we will go in that again. Actually, will we? That's on camera. Sorry. He was funny. It was funny about how he said that. He was like, well, I can't just call it Mahonia. It's so different than the rest of the barberries. Can we just call it Mahonia instead of barberries? So you might like there's enough visual difference that can we please call this something else instead of grouping it with the other barberries, which look very different. So yeah, there's some. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You and then you. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I noticed that there's always such a dichotomy between native and non-native or exotic. So how do you as a botanist see nativars, cultivars that might be common? At what point is it no longer a native plant?
That's a lot there. And actually, Travis talked to me yesterday, and he wants to know if others are interested in doing like a review of that in the literature, and how the differences in how much they're bred make in their ecological function, perhaps.
Did Mount Cuba do a big study on that recently?
Yeah, so a review article on it. Okay, that's worth looking into then.
Who did?
Mount Cuba.
Oh.
Yeah. And so there's a lot out there, like you know, on Weekly did one on anthracene and production and some purple leafed red buds, and they had fewer caterpillars, et cetera. So, I mean, certainly anything that's been intentionally bred, knowing that it's a cultivar, not a variety, which is a human bred versus naturally derived subpopulation, is still be important. So just nativar did not evolve on its own. Yeah. But real quickly, yes.
Yo, well,
Yeah.
I think this is such a fascinating question, and it feels like such a timely, relevant question for where we are, just in this sort of trying to bring more, native plants into our residential and commercial landscapes, or even, municipal landscapes. So I think it's just a really fascinating question. I even had an idea to maybe co-write some kind of article, sort of investigative piece of journalism with Matt, and if anybody else would like to collaborate on that, just to kind of look at that question, I think it's just fascinating and relevant.
Potential project, I suppose.
You mean as like nativars versus cultivars?
Yeah, and I guess I'll just throw out like that, like as someone who sort of relies on new nativars for to help try and get more native plants into residential landscapes. I think I see a lot of value in them, but kind of for the sake of just learning, sort of collegial learning, I'd like to just kind of throw out a very general personally challenge. If anybody would like to challenge that, and speak up for the value of using straight species versus nativars, I would love to hear your thoughts.
And I think that's also context dependent, right? Like if you're planting things in the landscape, sure, go with some wacky gaillardia if you want. But if you're trying to do some sort of ecological restoration or streamside restoration, let's try to do so a monoculture of nativars is not helpful, right? Real quick in the back, and then yeah.
Oh, my comment.
Sorry.
Than where we've gone, so.
Go ahead. We'll time travel.
I was just, on the paper, I make paper.
Oh, yes,
And one thing that is always really interesting to me in identifying is I have to make these things, and I want to make them as accurate at scale as possible. So you've got a lilium porophilum there that Lise made, and underneath the veins on the back side, there's two parallel veins on the back of that lily, but not two other lilies that look very much like it. The leaves are slightly different than two other lilies that look very much like it, and it's a rare and protected plant of coastal plain. But I'm teaching a workshop in a couple of weeks in the mountains in Western Carolina, and their lily is the superbum. Looks very similar, but it doesn't have a parallel vein on the back, and the leaves are somewhat different, but it has the green star in the middle, which the state wildflower of North Carolina, also the Lilium michellii, looks like those, but it doesn't have that green star in it. So I've got 3 different lilies that I'm teaching people how to make, and they want to know what's their lily. What grows in my area, what's native to the mountains. The porophilum is not native to the mountains, and so they're less interested in making that. So it doesn't keep you from enjoying the flower, but if you want to geek out on what's the difference between this, and this, it adds an extra layer of appreciation, I think, to be able to tell the difference between those three. You don't have to, but it's nice.
Very cool. These are also blowing my mind right now. And I'm really closer look. That's amazing.
Well, those are all paraphorums.
But just like everything. Like, so one more comment and then a question, and then I have a comment, and then we'll move on. Yeah.
What's your name again? Travis, that's right. I completely agree, and in fact, in my own, where I'm living now, I've been undergoing for 3 years now since I moved in. Not only getting rid of, there were 12 Sarcococcus hookeriana, is that it? And that's not a native, and it feeds nothing, even though it's got 12 million berries on it, so ripping them out. But also, if I see something I won't have any echinacea in the house except for the straight species. These hideous Frankenstein things why does an echinacea have to look like a peony? It doesn't, but that's just my opinion. I'd rather have an epimedium there that's a real epimedium, just because they're so beautiful, than have a lime green echinacea called pineapple surprise or something.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree.
That to me is scary. I don't want it.
Yeah. So related to that, the world travel I was just to one country, but we were in the Netherlands for 2 weeks with the Master Gardener group, and similarly we were at the Keukenhof where all the tulips are displayed annually, and there were tulips that look like peonies, tulips that look like lilies. Like, what's the point, people? Just but anyway, but that's also our problem. And no one can have taste as good as ours. Like I'd rather see. I'm much more interested in a garden that looks interesting and somewhat ecologically functional than some garish display of bright color, whatever. But that's a me problem. But in one of the botanic gardens we toured in Rotterdam, the tour guide was really good. She was one of the botanists there, and I asked her, so what's the, I say native, what do Europeans say? Because we're just 450 million people together. And they think we're a little obsessed with what native is here. Now, granted, on their side of the Eurasian subcontinent, there's been so much disturbance and so much movement that it's not an easy question to answer. Also, they have mountain ranges that tend to go east-west instead of north-south, so there's a lot of weird population flow dynamics and everything. And it's been disturbed continuously for about 8,000 years. And then when we're talking about native, we're talking about more of a massive Columbian period change in ecosystems, right? She was arguing that with climate change, we need to be more broad-minded on thinking about what species work in serve a similar ecological function, perhaps. But I don't think they were really as well versed in what we're facing here in the southeast. But anyway, so it was a whole other thing, and I got a little in a moment, but we had to move on and go somewhere else. And and then the other thing, back to your point on some of these subtle features, that if you have a two prominent lines on one species but not on another, or one green star shaped on a petal and not on the other, that is a proxy used to identify that species or population. That does not mean the reason these species speciated was because of that magical green dot necessarily, right? So anytime we're making distinctions among species using those diagnostic characters, that does not mean that's what was selected for. It's just a way there's some coherence to that feature visually that does correctly delineate those sets of populations. Okay, so if we have more time later as we're walking around, I'd be happy to address any other questions you had from the lectures. What I want to do real quick is spend about 10 minutes reviewing what dichotomous keys are and how they work. And then we're going to spend some time trying to key out two tree species together and then individually. After I recorded 6-7 hours of blabbing, I don't think I included this in here. If I'm repeating myself, that's just sit down and enjoy it. So the systematic approach that I referred to in lectures 1 and 4 is your approach with a totally unknown thing, and you will want to find some way to accurately identify it. We're going to probably use a dichotomous key, and this skill can be used in any realm of biology. So we thought it would be good for you to lead this program understanding how to use this method. So there are other kinds of keys too, but we're going to focus on dichotomous keys. There are other things called like linear keys, but a dichotomous key is essentially some sort of decision tree used to identify organisms. It consists of sets of couplets, so pairs of descriptions, and each of those descriptions is called a lead. And what you do is you take a given sample. This is a green chai in here, by the way. It's delicious. So you get a given sample, and you read the two descriptions and see if the features you see more closely match one lead over the other. And given so you choose the characters that better match that specimen, and then it will tell you where to go next. And you keep repeating that process in an iterative fashion until you get to a taxon name or a species name or a family or wherever rank you're looking at.
Matt, is that, so that's not the straight species you're drinking there? You said that's.
No, yes, it's actually, this is new, okay. In Kashmir, they have like a green chai that has cardamom in it. It is divine. It's like so it's called, I think it's called Iwa or something, AY, anyway. Yeah, so it's a blend of green. Okay, so a very simple key I have on the front here. I stole this from probably someone copyrighted. It's on video, never mind. But this is a simple key for oaks, many of which don't occur here, but it'll give you the same idea. Now, this is one potential configuration of a key. There can be others, and for comparison, look at some of Wheatley's keys or the Radford key, the big thick book at the back, on how these can be arranged in different ways. But in this method, we have the couplets are numbered, and you start at the first number at the top, and you compare the two different couplets with the two different leads in the couplet, the two different leads with the same number. It's better practice, in my humble opinion, that when you have two different numbers in the same key, to add an apostrophe or a prime, so that way you can keep track of which one you're looking at, so 1 and 1 prime. But in this case, they're calling both of these 1. So say you have a sample in front of you, and you ask yourself, are the leaves with teeth or lobes or without teeth or lobes? Let's say I look at the leaf sample, and it does have some sort of lobing or teething on it. So that means I go to couplet 5. I don't go here. I go all the way down here as my next step, okay? And then you repeat the process. So the leaves are tobes bristle-tipped, or are they rounded and without bristles? And let's say, looking at it, they have no bristles. So we don't go here. We go back down here to couplet 7. And then are there 5 to 9 lobes or many more shallow lobes? And let's say it's 5 to 9 lobes, and it appears to be white lobe. So that is a simple way to look at a simple key. In other cases, there might be, as like with Radford and with Wheatley, they indent keys. And so you will go underneath. You'll go to the next indentation. And the fun part with Radford especially is if you go to one page to another and you don't notice, well, that indentation is about 3 millimeters off, and it will entirely screw you up, and you'll be identifying a weedy pine tree or something. So just pay attention to that difference. But for the most part, most of them are numbered in this way. Here is an example from Wheatley. This is Anacardiaceae, so that's the family. We know it's in that group. It looks kind of sumac-y. I don't know quite what it is. So I look at the leaf, and the leaf simple or compound. Notice it doesn't tell you. If you say it's simple, it will already tell you the genus, and then you can go down to the different species in that genus and repeat the process. But let's say they're compound. In this case, it doesn't tell you to go to number 2, but because the next couplet is indented, it's kind of assumed you go there next. Okay? And then you ask yourself, the leaves evenly pinnate or oddly pinnate, meaning does it have a terminal leaflet or does it not? Let's say it has a terminal leaflet, and we look at the fruit. That's a pain. What if it's not in fruit? Well, hard to identify that. I mean, there's going to be scenarios where you don't have enough visual information to get to the species level. So you're left to say it's something Anacardiaceae that isn't Cotinus, smoke tree. You look at say you have berries though, and they're not both red and glabrous. And then you assume to go to the next indentated couplet here, and we look at say it's you look at the sepal margins, and some of them are smooth, the others are ciliate, or what's a better idea? You're rubbing on yourself and you realize, oh, I should go to the hospital. Then you realize, this might be Toxicodendron, which is aptly named, and that is poison ivy. So I did have kind of an interesting professor for systematics, and on quizzes you would go in and just have something out, and you have to identify it, right, using a key. He left poison ivy out, and the C and lower students kept touching it. It's like, well, hopefully liability waiver covered that. So anyway, so that's an example of, I don't have this plugged in. Here's, and so once you go to a family or a genus, you try to find that name in the key. Like in the case of your book, which I'll show you in a minute, you'll flip forward to that page number that has all the species in that genus. Same thing with Toxicodendron here, and this is just a later part in Wheatley's key. And then you do the same thing. So count the number of leaflets, see if the fruits are hairy or not, and you can get, in this case, he's distinguishing between 3 different subspecies of poison ivy, right? Again, he's a splitter. So when you're using a dichotomous key, know what your species, know what species your key covers. You could say take this sample of a tree and key it out using the flora of South Africa, and you will get an answer. It won't be the right one, but it'll be an answer. So understand what region your key is covering, and it's important to look at several specimens ideally and several parts of those specimens. So don't look at a single leaf from a single tree and make assumptions. There's going to be, as Ashley alluded to, a lot of variability naturally in these groups. All of the 3 of the 4 of the oaks we'll learn outside today have really strongly variable leaves in a single individual, comically so. So make sure you're getting a good look at it. And then also in the case of things like leaf arrangement, the closer you are to the tip, the harder it will be to determine leaf arrangement, because the stem hasn't grown as much, so the distances between the leaves is very tight, and so it can be hard to make that distinction to see if it's truly opposite world or alternate. So go further down the stem and see if that arrangement becomes more regular in appearance. Also look for leaf scars. If it's not leafed out at that point, look at leaf scars and buds, and those will also tell you the same sort of arrangement. Do look carefully, but don't delude yourself. Yesterday, as we were trying to find a short-leaf pine from a distance, I kept saying, short-leaf? And I would get closer, and I was like, there's got to be resin ducts on here, and then there was none. So don't delude yourself. If you think you almost may see something, the keys should be relatively robust, meaning that the features should be somewhat conspicuous, ideally, not always. And then know how to backtrack if you need to. So if you get to a point in the key, like you're deep in grasses or something because you hate yourself, or love yourself, it's okay. Grasses are plants too. Be able to know where you have some ambiguity and go back in the key to see if you can, try another path to see if it leads you to the light side of the forest. And then this getting frustrated and making mistakes and getting the wrong taxa is part of the process. Professional botanists will do that all the time. Like you key it, like, well, shit, that wasn't it, and that's clearly not a palm tree, right? I mean, so that's that. Doing that iterative backtracking is just part of it. So don't let that indicate that, or don't assume you're incompetent because of that. Okay, it's part of it. It's part of it. And then I had a thought too on No, I lost it. Never mind. Yeah, I may think of it later. So those would be my key tips, and have fun doing it. It can be a fun puzzle to sick people like me. Yeah, go ahead.
Where I always get frustrated is I'm often trying to figure out what a tree is, and I can't get anywhere near the leaves because they're really tall and I'm not.
Yeah.
So, any tips on that? I mean, I know bark, like I was using the winter one that we got in our books for bark, but then it always asks you for the leaves, like it's one of the next steps, and then
So you can sometimes just look for, if it's deciduous, look at fallen leaves nearby. That can sometimes be a clue. Look for fallen fruit, nuts, seeds. But the fact is, you don't have the requisite information to make that judgment, so you can't know it, unfortunately. And bark is tricky because certainly as you learn things holistically, you'll get a better feel for it. But bark varies with age and can vary a lot between individuals, and some species can look very similar. It's also very hard to describe. The reason we use all these other features is there's some sort of kind of concreteness to those descriptions. With bark, it's like, well, it's kind of platy, and it's more alligator than blocky, you know, like that. It's really hard to describe consistently. But within a given region, once you start to recognize some of them, it can be really helpful identifier. Dr. Krings's bark ID link, I think it was in the resources, is pretty good, but it really only is helpful for distinctive species, like shagbark hickory. I mean, bam, right? Or hopefully, as we see later, shortleaf pine. But others, you know, it's hard. So grow taller legs is my suggestion. Yeah.
Or you could also just cut the tree down.
Yes, yeah. That would be a very 19th century Western approach. Yeah. Let's put all of this species in the herbarium, and then it's extinct. Which has happened. Okay. Then the other thing, all of you have very nice hand lenses now. Okay. And this is going to be your magical tour. I look like a total pretentious dweeb when I wear this, but in this context, it's okay. I'll allow it. So a hand lens is also called often a Hastings triplet or a jeweler's loupe. Hastings triplet because it has 3 lenses in it, and it gives you a lot of magnification in a small area, but it also has a very short focal length. So there is a proper way to use this. And if you're using them properly, I will make fun of you. Because of the short focal length, you've got to hold it close to your eye. And on microscopes, I take off my glasses. Mike Munster made fun of me for that, but I just can't live with it. But with hand lenses, I can keep my glasses on, and they work fine. But you got to hold it close to your eye and look as dorky as possible. Okay, like there. And then you hold the object you're looking at close to the lens too. So marvel, just for fun, at how disgusting your fingernails are. So anyway, so see if you can just practice on some object. No. Closer to your eyeball. Yeah. Good. Okay. Yeah. And that'll just more reliably make it easier to look at. I don't know why I do this. But, so yeah, that's how you use it properly, and it's going to be essential for identifying some species. You cannot identify grasses without magnification. Period. So, just species at least. Okay, so that's what we use. Now, what we'll do is, if our helpers could pass out mystery tree.